We got a few more people coming in, so we'll just give them a chance to get settled in. Welcome, everyone. My name is Spiff Whitfield, the former SIGV chairperson, but proud member nevertheless. So welcome, grab yourself a bench. We've got a great night. Ellen, how are you? Okay, I think we'll officially get this underway. Again, thanks everyone for coming. My name is Spiff Whitfield. I am your SIGV Speaker Series host. To get a little more information about our speaker this evening, or our guest, I've put into chat the brief bio and information section about Oronoque. And also feel free to tweet things out and include Iste as a hashtag. So we will begin our evening, and before I introduce our guests, I do want to just mention that the latest issue of the Virtual Education Journal has come out, and I just want to put down a link to the chat, or link in chat, Virtual Education Journal and the latest issue with a lot of awesome articles by many of the people that are in this very room. So I hope you'll read it and support it and share it. I think sharing it via social network is a great way to get the word out and to get really all the great projects that we do as a group. So I just want to throw that out there. Our guest this evening is Oronoque Westland, and we try and keep our Second Life names in world here. And this is a great interview for me because I've known Oronoque really almost since starting Second Life. It's been really quite a while, and Oronoque was and is a proud member of the Virtual Pioneers and has led tours for us. She's done presentations, and she's just been on our tours with us. So I've known Oronoque very well, and she's doing a lot of great work behind the scenes and outside of our Second Life ventures. And she's going to share with us this evening her Digital Africana presentation. And since I've got a phone ringing in the background, I'm going to turn this over to Oronoque. Oronoque, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Spiff, and thank you to Iste for allowing me the time to speak with everyone today. I am going to apologize in advance. I had made a promise to use a speakeasy HUD and did not have time to prepare it. So for the very first time, I'm going to be using Dragon Naturally Speaking to go into the chat window. So I must apologize for all of the typos that are going to result. This is a bit of an experiment, but I'm hoping that I can at least make a half decent text to go along with my oral presentation. Okay, I know that we use our avatar names here, but in the physical world, I teach at a university in New York City in the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican Latino Studies. I also have a very strong interest in educational technology, and I've been trying for the last 6 or 7 years to marry those two interests. And one of the ways in which I've done that is to teach a course that's considered experimental, still for the moment, called Digital Sources and Methodologies in Africana Studies. And there are a few things that I concentrate on in that course. I have to remember that my slides are here. Okay, there are a few things that I concentrate on in that course. They are the potential and challenges of digital sources and methodologies, databases and websites that are available for use in the subject area of Africana Studies, and virtual environments that are also available. It's an inquiry-based learning course and also a project-based learning course. So there's very little lecturing that goes on, primarily discussions. We use a wide range of media. It's a multimodal course. The course is also fully online. Okay, so that gives you a general overview of the course. I should say also that this is a 45-hour course given in 3 weeks in the month of January, so it's very intensive. Okay, the first week we concentrate on understanding both the potentials and the challenges of digital resources, especially as it applies to communities of peoples of African descent. So in that week we have an overview, an introduction to the course, a discussion of methodology, a discussion of what's meant by the digital divide, and also copyright, and we might say copy wrong as well. One of the things that I stress during that first week is the question of digital divide and what that means to us now, especially in the United States, because some of you may be familiar with the Horizon reports. And Horizon has found that, in fact, in communities of color, there's a very high use of the internet. There's a lot of access to the internet, but it's primarily for things like texting and Facebook and so forth, and not for creative work. So the digital divide now in the United States in Africana communities has more to do with how we use the internet as opposed to internet access. But in many parts of the world where you find communities of peoples of African descent, there's still a very important question of internet access and limited internet access. During the first week, we have a discussion. This past January, I used an article called Wanted, Some Black Long-Distance Writers, Blackboard, Flavor Flavin, and Other Afro-Digital Experiences in the Classroom. This is an article that discusses the experience of students in a writing course, a first-year writing course, who were using the discussion board feature in Blackboard Learning Management System. There also is a general review of information literacy, basic digital literacy, and expository writing. These are subjects that the students should have already studied in their first year at the university, but often have forgotten some of the important features of that. And finally, they choose a research topic that's related to Africana studies. And this is a topic that they'll use throughout the 3-week period. It can have anything to do with Africana studies. It doesn't have to be a cultural topic. The first time I taught the course, half of my students were nursing students, so they looked into issues that were related to healthcare problems that were specific to the African American community, and so on. In the second week, we explore and evaluate databases, digital archives, and websites. So I start by looking at those databases that the university subscribes to that are particularly relevant to Africana studies. The students are already familiar. The students are already familiar with JSTOR, Project Muse, and some of the other databases, but they're not so familiar with the ones that have to do with Africana studies. And then I turn to some of the online libraries and online archives that are available for free. Things like the Digital Library of the Caribbean and so forth, because I want them to be aware of the existence of these libraries that anyone can access without having to pay subscription fees or anything of that sort. We look also at quantitative data, at multimedia, video, audio, photography, and so forth, and point out not only what's available, but also some of the problems in using them. For example, some of you may be aware of a photograph that originally was a photograph of African Americans who fought in the Union Army during the Civil War. This photograph was doctored using Photoshop to make it appear as though these African American soldiers had been fighting in the Army of the Confederacy. And you can find it on a great many internet sites that claim to be scholarly. And the photograph is now pointed to as evidence that African Americans fought on behalf of the Confederacy. So this of course is something that could happen in any subject area. It's not at all limited to Africana studies, but it is very important that students who are engaged in using digital resources be aware that this kind of manipulation can go on. And finally, in week 2, we look at racism and anti-racism. The websites, the virtual sites, some of them right here in Second Life, that are used as means of spreading racist ideas and ideologies and views and practices, as well as those sites that are used in the struggles against racism. The discussion during that second week focuses on a article that was, one moment please. It focuses on an article by Orville Vernon Burton. Orville Vernon Burton is a U.S. historian who specializes in Southern U.S. history. And a number of years ago, he wrote an article in which he called upon historians to take a more proactive role, working with people in the computer sciences to develop computer resources, both for the teaching and for research in the field of history. His argument was that unless historians come to the fore, and I think this is true for any other person in the teaching profession, unless they come to the fore, that decisions on these computer-aided resources will be made by the technologists as opposed to the practitioners of the disciplines. So it's a nice article because he also has links to a great many websites. So the students not only comment on the article, but they also click on the links, go to the websites, and evaluate those websites for themselves. In the second week, they also learn about Zotero. Zotero is a tool that's used. Zotero, now it's saying Zotero. Zotero. not Zotero. Zotero. Okay. This is a tool that's freely available that students can use to keep track of their references. So they use this to create annotated bibliographies. And then they use Omeka, which is a curation site, Omeka. It is a curation site that can be used for archival purposes. It can be used to create exhibits and so forth. And there are quite a few museums as well as scholars in the humanities who are using these sites. And then finally, in week 3, which is our last week, we explore and evaluate virtual environments and also serious gaming. So we look at some of the sites that have to do with museum sites, where museums have put online exhibits on the internet. We look at heritage projects. We look at some basic mapping, primarily Google Earth. We look at some of the virtual archaeology sites and also some of the serious games. And again, now we have a discussion. The discussion this January focused on an article that was written after Hurricane Katrina, where two geography professors from, I believe it was the University of Kentucky, talked about how Google Earth was used in some very important ways, not only to track Hurricane Katrina, but also to track the aftermath of the hurricane. And what they found was that while Google Earth was a fantastic tool for these purposes, that the information contained in there, of course, is user generated, very much like what happens in Second Life. So in communities with largely African American populations in New Orleans, there were very few place marks entered into Google Earth. In communities that were largely European American, there were far more place marks there. So the point that the authors were trying to make is that while these tools can be very useful and have a very positive impact, they are only as good as the users who create the input into these tools, make them, and that it's necessary to find ways to increase the usage of these tools by underserved communities. And then in week 3, the students also go on virtual tours. And that is where I would like to change my focus now. For the virtual tours, I give them a analysis report template. And this is basically what the heading on the template has. They have to go to 4 virtual environments. The virtual environments, I give them several to choose from. They're divided between heritage projects, mapping projects, virtual archaeology, and real-life values. They have to give a rating using a simple 1 to 5 scale of the ease of use of the site. And then from a learning perspective, they need to say at least 3 things that they found that are positive about the site and 3 things that they found were negative about the site. Unfortunately, the Middle Passage sim is no longer there. What is still here, however, is the receiving end of the Middle Passage sim. So that part where people would arrive in the Americas is still there, and then the auction block and so forth on the Atlantic side. Yes, it is really quite a shame. In the last few years, several of the really good sims and bills, not just in Africana studies, but in general, have been taken down. Okay, now what I'm going to show you are the responses that I got from the students. I'll comment a little bit about some of their responses, but primarily I want to share with you their perspectives on these sites because I think it's important to understand or to have an insight into what it is the student feels about these sites and not just our own attitudes towards these sites. The first one is in the suite by and by. All of the sites I'm going to show you still exist, but they're not necessarily maintained, and that's part of the problem that we're having in Second Life and on the internet generally, that people have created things. In many cases, they're still accessible, but they're not being maintained. Okay, so the first site that I suggested to students was in the suite by and by, and that's here in Second Life. It is, and I quote from the creator's website, a fusion of visual art, literature, and immersive digital technologies. This site interweaves images, space, and sound. It's a collaboration between the real-life artist Philip Mallory Jones and his mother, Dorothy Mallory Jones, who's a poet and a historian. And it's a memoir. When you go into it, on the build at the University of Ohio, I believe, it is a memoir that you see through the eyes or the camera of the avatar. What I found was that when the students went to this site, they looked around and made comments that were more appropriate to Second Life in general and not specific to this site. Some felt that Second Life was easy to install. Let me backtrack for a moment. I suggest to my students that they go to the Virtual Ability website and create their avatar there. It is, for one thing, it's one of the most straightforward sites to follow. Plus, the people at Virtual Ability give wonderful support to anyone who enters through that way. Whether or not the person has a challenge of some sort is immaterial to them. They assist everyone. So that's the way they go. So I wasn't surprised when the students said that it was easy to install. They commented that it was a user-built environment and saw that as something very positive. One student was interested in the fact that there is currency, Linden dollars, in Second Life. And they were also impressed by the fact that it's an environment in which you can have audio-visual material as well as textual material. On the negative side, one of the students downloaded Second Life using both the English language version and the Spanish language version, and he found that the Spanish language version had many mistakes in it. He or she, I'm not or the gender of the particular student. There were comments that that is, I believe, Second Life and not in the Sweet By and By, that it was a difficult place to understand for non-gamers, for people who didn't have a background in video gaming. They found the building tools complicated. They were eager to communicate with other avatars and found it difficult to find them. The student who was interested in the fact that there was currency said that it was hard to be profitable in Second Life. The comment that was specific to In the Sweet By and By was that the audio was overlapping there. I think that the overlapping audio was actually, yes, these were university students. I think that the overlapping audio was actually intentional, because as your avatar goes through the space in the Sweet By and By, you pass from an area where you're hearing one portion of the mother's memoir into an area where you're hearing another portion of the memoir. But for the student who was new to Second Life, this was confusing to have more than one audio track that could be heard. The second site or sim in Second Life that I referred students to was the SRM Sunrise Museum. This is owned by India Vaher. India, in this case, is spelled I-N-D-E-A. The last name is V-A-H-E-R. Many of you would know India from Virtual Harlem and Virtual Montmartre. She is a professional artist in real life and also does some fantastic artistic and creative work here in Second Life. This sim is a recreation of Gula culture of the Sea Islands off of the Georgia coast, and also of Creole culture of the Cane and Red River valleys in that vicinity. This is also where you'll find the receiving end of what used to be the Middle Passage build. So the auction block is there. In addition to the auction block, there's a church, there's a rice field, there is an art gallery and museum. It's quite an elaborate build in a small space, because I believe it's about a quarter of a sim. The students found it easy to access information there and said that there was plenty of information on Gula culture. On Gullah culture. As you go through the build and you come to various aspects of the build, for example, there is a bot who looks very much like an avatar who is weaving seagrass baskets, and you can click on her. You get a note card explaining the importance of seagrass culture and so forth. Yes, I think that would be an excellent trip for us to go on. And India would be more than happy to receive us. There's information there provided on the slave trade, as I mentioned, including the auction block. The students said that they learned about artists, African American and other African descended artists who they had never heard of before, including India herself. And they liked the fact that they could be at home in their physical home and visit a museum. I see Spiff has an order that he has to follow up on. And one student said it was like playing a video game, and they like that aspect of it. On the negative side, students commented about the system requirements here in Second Life. A couple of students felt that the items on the build were scattered, and they would have liked to have had a map, like a road map, so that they could go from place to place. I think this is similar to when someone goes to a place like Colonial Williamsburg or one of the other reconstructed historical villages or towns that we might be familiar with here in the United States, and just tries to find their way from place to place. So I didn't think that this was a criticism that was peculiar to her build in any way. Some of the note cards didn't work properly. Um, we can never be sure if that's a Second Life issue or if that is something that's specific to the sim. And they said that there was no information on the artwork that they saw in the museum. Now, I've been in the museum myself, and I have, in fact, seen note cards that you get when you click on the artwork. So I don't know if there was some particular issue when this student went, or if the student just wasn't clear on where they had to click. And then in that category, I gave them the choice or the alternative of Seneca Village. A Seneca Village is a website. It's not here in Second Life. I wanted to give them an alternative for those students who didn't feel comfortable using Second Life. Seneca Village itself was a real village that was established in 1825 on land that currently is on the western side of Central Park along the Park Drive, stretching from West 82nd Street to West 89th Street. In 1995, the staff of the Education Department at the New York Historical Society began a project where they were working with 7th grade students in New York City schools that was focused on Seneca Village. I'll put the URL in the chat. Okay, did it. I can't tell you. The first time I tried to do it, my printer started printing. I don't know what it's printing, but it is printing. You have to love technology. Okay. So in 1995, as I said, they began working with schools in New York City, 7th grade students, on a project around Seneca Village. And then they decided that they wanted to expand that and create a website that was targeted not just at school children, but at adults as well. Those of you who are from New York, and maybe some of you from outside of New York, would be aware that it was around that same period when there was suddenly this realization that slavery had actually existed in New York City, And this was one of the outcomes of trying to address the lack of knowledge around that issue. So you have this website. It takes up several web pages, and it is on this community that existed from 1825 to 1857. The students found the information there quite exciting. They like the way in which it was organized with various pop-ups that came up on an as-needed basis to give them additional information. Part of the website, when you go through it, is like a digital story, and you see Seneca Village through the eyes of one of the residents. They like the fact that there is a storyline. It's almost like you're reading a story as opposed to getting a history lesson, which some students find to be a negative experience, getting a history lesson. As you go through it, there are various clues to the history of the village in the form of primary sources that the website shares with you, maps, other forms of illustration. And they like that too, that they could be kind of detectives as they went through the site. A few of them expressed surprise that the history of slavery in New York City went to the early 19th century, so that this is one of the first villages established by free African Americans in New York City. So they were learning something that was quite new for some of them. They also like the fact that there was a listing of additional readings and outside sources that they could go to if they wanted to expand their knowledge in this area. I was pleased to see some of the negative comments, not because there were negative things to be said, but because it showed that they were looking at this site not just from the perspective of the information contained there, but also from the perspective of its usability. I'm sorry, I can't go to that site right now, but I thought I put the URL in earlier for it. I can check a little later to confirm whether or not that's the site. Okay, so one of the things they pointed out was that the background to the web pages had very bright colors, and this made it difficult for people to look at the page for any length of time. And they said that the flow from page to page was not that great, that they had to click too many times, that there was no way to move backwards through the pages. Some commented that the pages were not in chronological order. Now, this business of chronological order is a personal preference, I think, for individuals. One of the positive things that some people say about websites is that you can organize things or create your site in a way that it doesn't have to be chronological, that allows the user to go wherever they want to go. So I think this is a judgment call for individuals and what their personal preference is. They pointed out that the site was outdated, that it had not been maintained, and that some of the technology used, because this is an area where, internet technology, digital technology is fast progressing, that the site just seemed to be aged, that it needed to be enhanced with some modern um, audio visuals and videos and so forth. And this is a problem, I think, with many sites. And here you have, a very reputable, very active organization, the New York Historical Society, that's created a website that's not being maintained. So it's unfortunate. A couple of students said that they would like to see comparisons made between Seneca Village and Central Park today, so that they could see how that section of the park has changed. One student, I think, was actually suggesting that there be an augmented reality application developed, although the student did not use the term augmented reality. But they wanted something where they could actually go to the park and compare what they were seeing on the site, on the website, with what was in front of them in the physical environment. And I think that would be a great thing for someone to develop. Some of the images are very small. They look like postage stamps, and when you click on them, they don't enlarge. One student felt that some of the language was too formal, that it would not be appealing to a general audience, and there were some technical problems that students encountered. There were mapping projects. One of the choices was a project called Digital Harlem, and I just realized our time is going very quickly, so I'm going to speed up a bit through this. The creators of this site, Digital Harlem, have used census data. They've used data from the law courts, and so forth in New York. And they've created a website that covers the period 1915 to 1930. The students said that they found it very interesting, that it has a great search engine. And then they made some interesting comments, because some said that they can reach everything from the home page, and they find that to be a positive thing. Others said they can reach everything from the home page, and that's a negative thing. So I guess you can't please everybody all the time. Interestingly enough, no one commented that in a website called Digital Harlem Everyday Life 1915 to 1930, the main focus is on criminal activity. You can see here some of the negative concerns, the use of aliases instead of real names. Some of the pop-up windows were hard to read, and so forth. This was an interesting site also, The Wrong Climate for Damming Rivers. The creator of this site used Google Earth to create a Google Earth tour and wanted to advance the argument that in several parts of the world, Africa included, that the creation of dams is actually going to have a negative impact because of climate change. That given climate change, that there are going to be changes in the flow of rivers, and the creation of dams is going to aggravate water shortage problems. Here you can see some of the comments that students had. Many of them liked the fact that Google Earth was being used because we had already looked at Google Earth in our class, and they had seen Google Earth used in other classes, so it was something that they were familiar with. Visualizing Emancipation is a website. It's a GIS site. It uses mapping, and what it's done, you can see with the red dots and the blue dots, basically it's mapping events during the Civil War. I think one of the most important negative comments about this site was that people felt that the human aspect was missing. That emancipation has to do fundamentally with human beings who were enslaved, who through various processes had gained their freedom, and they didn't feel there was anything in this site that told you that it was human beings. There are no photographs, there are no images, there are no oral histories, nothing. So that was the major criticism advanced. I just want to mention this one, and then I'll stop because I know that there are questions, and this is taking me more time than I had anticipated to present. The Rosewood Heritage Project. I want to mention this one for a number of reasons. It exists as a website. I will get the URL in a moment. Okay, that's the URL for the website. The website includes a virtual environment that was created in Unity 3D. And the photograph you see here is from the Unity 3D environment. The website also goes into great detail about what occurred at Rosewood in 1923. There was essentially a race riot. Those of you from my generation, we tend to think of race riots as something that African American people are involved in. But the race riot in 1923 was actually a European American riot in which the town of Rosewood, which was predominantly African American, was destroyed, totally destroyed, and some of the inhabitants killed and others scattered. So the website provides information on that background. It also talks about, why the Heritage Project was carried out, what were some of the steps involved, the decision to create the Unity 3D version of Rosewood. And then also here in Second Life, there is an associated museum, a Rosewood Museum. And I believe Virtual Pioneers went there a few years ago. It's still there, and it has a small version of the town of Rosewood. There is a pilot project as well to have an augmented reality version of Rosewood, but it has not been released to the public. And the creator is very reluctant to release it because there's no protection for this site. It's an archaeological site. It is a site that has great significance for the descendants of the people who were killed and scattered from Rosewood. It is a site that is subject to a great deal of vandalism. So the historian geographer who's involved in this project is very reluctant to release the augmented reality version. Here you have the students' comments. They like the fact that it used 3D, that there was this virtual tour in Unity 3D. They felt that the animation and being able to go into the Unity 3D site made it feel like there was a sense of presence, that they were actually on site at Rosewood. They found the signage, the information signs, very useful, and so forth. There were a few problems with the Unity 3D viewer. Some found it difficult to move around in the town. They did not like the fact that they could not enter the buildings, whereas in Second Life in the Rosewood Museum, you can enter the buildings that are there, right? And I think I will leave it at that for now because I know that there are questions. So, Spiff, if you could assist me, please.
Sure. I know one of the questions was you've shared a lot of URLs here and a lot of sites. Do you have a place where a one-stop shopping where people can find either your presentation or the various URLs and Sims?
I can make it available.
That would be
Either.
great.
Okay, I don't want to work on it while we're speaking, but I can do it immediately after.
That's fine. We can share it out through our various venues. One of the things that strikes me right off the top is I like the way that you basically challenge your students to come up with the advantages and disadvantages, which I think is a key component to critically thinking about these Sims. Did you find you got kind of a, for lack of a better term, that robust discussion and attention to detail, and actually maybe pulling the history thinking a little bit further out with your students?
Let me put it this way. Yes and no. Yes and no. This course was not so much a history course where I could focus, peel back the onion and look in greater detail at some of the content that was in these sites, the historical content, the cultural content, and so forth. That was not the purpose of this course, although I did want to sensitize the students to that. With this course, I wanted the students to be able to then go on into their other classes, pursue their other disciplinary interests, and so forth, and take some of the analytical skills that they developed in this course and apply them there. Okay. There is a reluctance in my department to make heavy use of virtual environments in our courses, in part because of the technical requirements. We are all familiar with some of the issues involved in using Second Life, for example, the systems requirements. And also because many of the students that I have in my second year courses are taking the courses to meet various distribution requirements. They're not overly interested, I hate to put it this way, but they're not overly interested in the subject matter. I have to find ways to excite them about the subject matter. But if there's a big learning curve, it becomes counterproductive, unfortunately. When I have the other courses that I teach, this one that looks specifically at digital resources, and then in my third and fourth year courses, where I have students who are majors and minors in Africana studies, there is far greater willingness to explore digital resources in the kinds of ways that I think you're asking about. So for this course, I'm trying to whet their appetites, right? Those who come and follow on with me into the third and fourth years, they know that they're going to get more than their appetites whet with this stuff.
So what are your plans? Where do we go from here, Oronoque? What's your next steps?
Okay, well, in the coming academic year, I am going to offer an elective where the students are actually going to create a digital resource. Whether it's a website or a virtual environment, perhaps using OpenSim or something of that sort, where they have to do a serious research project, take that analysis and information and deliver it in a digital or virtual form. I think it's really important that our students be creative. And that's something that has been stressed in Second Life. I know it at Iste, at Virtual Pioneers and so forth. We stress so much the importance of students really building, not just consuming these virtual worlds and resources. So that's my next step, and I hope I get enough students who have an interest to take those steps with me.
Can you tell me just anecdotally about the engagement from your students? Did you find they were really into this type of learning, taking it to a different direction than probably most of their other courses?
The students who come into this particular course, Digital Resources and Methodologies in Africana Studies, have a very strong interest before they even come into the course. They appreciate that the 21st century is going to place demands on them to be masters of digital resources. So there's already that interest coming into the course. They're learning new skills, new information, new analytical talents, and so forth as we go through the course together. So they're very receptive. In my courses that are the more general courses, I teach primarily Caribbean history. I will get I would say a small number of students who are interested in this type of digital resource. They are more receptive to looking at things like the databases, the online libraries, the online archives, and so forth, because more and more of the students they're working full time, they have families, and they don't have the time to go to the physical libraries. And they are glad to find that there are ways that they can pursue their research interests at these odd hours like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., or whatever. They can pursue them from home online. So they're interested in that type of digital resource. But they're by and large, in my general history courses, there's not a great interest in virtual environments of the Rosewood type.
Wow, well, Oronoque, you've given us just wow, a lot of food for thought this evening, and our time is coming to the close.
Well, I want to thank you so much for having me here and for having an opportunity to share this um, with everyone who's here. And if anyone would like to make some suggestions or criticisms or anything of what I shared tonight, I would really welcome that.
Well, you're doing great things, Oronoque, and we really appreciate it. I know you're kind of on the front lines on the university setting, so any small foothold is a good place to start. So keep up the good work, and I think you've managed to take up all the time. There's no more time left for my geeky speed questions.
That was deliberate. Scott warned me too.
Okay. So if you can maybe put together those list of resources for us, we'll get that out on our website. I want to thank Blue Barker for being our camera person tonight. I want to thank Beth Ghostraven for being our events planner and scheduler. And always, I want to thank good buddy Scott Merrick, who came on in. And this is going to be my last interview for a little while, so I'm going to thank Oronoque. First computer.
Day
We've
wants
got
to
the
know.
speed questions coming in.
Okay. The very first computer I used filled up an entire building on the Columbia University campus. I was 11 years old at that time. The first computer I had in my house was an IBM PC Junior that my dad got for me.
Awesome. You didn't escape quite as well as you wanted to. Okay, everyone, again, thanks. Blue Barker is going to make this presentation available so you can catch up on it at a later time. We're going to be having, I always have a tough time with your name, Duangle is going to be our, Delightful Duangle is going to be our SIGV Speaker Series host, so stay tuned for more information and about our next guest. I love learning and hearing about different people, and so I'll be able to keep learning and seeing some of the great things that people are doing on the other side. So thanks everyone for coming. And this is Spiff Whitfield signing out for the evening. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you so much, Spiff, and thanks everyone.
I also want to thank Spiff for like decades of work here.
Loved every minute of it.